Thank you, Shane. So we do have one other possible perspective from construction, and that's Peter Coxhell. Was there anything you'd like to add, Peter?
Thanks, Pam, for having me. Look, I haven't got any formal presentation today, but if I was to have something, the issues that the construction industry generally face are not all that dissimilar to Todd at Nearstar. And I guess I put them in two different categories. One is high-risk construction work, and the other is where the vast majority of our injuries occur from that normally comes from actually non-high-risk construction work. So let me start with the high-risk construction work, where our industry currently has got a fairly significant focus. High-risk construction work is defined in the regulation. There's quite a significant list, but the ones that specifically I want to focus on just amount to 4. Working at heights, electrical work, working around mobile plant, and then of course often when we're doing a major refurbishment, inevitably the issue of asbestos comes up and how we're going to deal with the asbestos, whether it's in situ or whether we have to remove it. If I go back, starting at working at heights, if I go back to 2012, there were 2 significant injuries. One was a fatality within the construction industry, and both involved working at heights. The first one involved a Fairbrother site at the Homemaker Centre in Devonport. And what we had was a roofing contractor and a young guy who fell through a box gutter, which wasn't secured. So that was the first one. The second one was on a Voss site, which I was involved in. And basically what we had was another roofing contractor. It was a factory that was being put together and with a roof gradient of about 5%, so it wasn't particularly steep. But one morning, very early before anybody else on site, the roofing contractor got on site, and the first thing he was doing was rolling out this mesh over the beams. And then the next part was to actually put the roofing iron on. And part of the job was to put appropriate edge protection right round as they were going along. Now, if you look at the Australian standard for edge protection, it requires 3 bars, one at 900, one at about 450, and a third one about another 300 or 275 below. And the contractor didn't put that third rail in. And what happened was he tripped on some of the mesh and actually fell through a significant gap between the middle rail and no bottom rail. And he's still alive today, but his quality of life is fairly ordinary. He sustained quite a nasty brain injury. So that's been a focus especially for the last 5 years, but we still get frustrating events on our sites. One recently up in the north of the state involved a concreter. They were pouring a suspended slab on a second level of I think a 3-level building that was being constructed. And right around the slab area was compliant edge protection, so we had the 3 rails. And there were 2 areas actually, and between the 2 areas was a stairwell. On one side of it, it had a precast panel, which was perhaps up to about 10 metres high, only 150 mil in thickness. And we had a concreter who got out over the side of the railing, walked along that 150 mil wide precast panel to the other side to deliver something to his mate who'd called him across. And we saw him and said, 10 metres, you've got to be joking. But we still get that sort of stuff. Electrical work. One of the frustrating things at times is trying to keep workers doing the right thing, especially with electric leads. We either need to get them off the ground, up on non-conductive hooks, or over against the wall where scissor lifts are not going to run over them, for example. But we still get people who just plug their leads in and just leave them on the ground for people to walk over. And so going back to, Todd, what you were talking about in terms of that you have to keep on at and keep the message going all the time, that's what we're trying to work on. Working around mobile plant, we're really trying to encourage all our workers on our sites to try and get an exclusion zone. We have scissor lifts on site, boom lifts on site, little excavators, large excavators, and we're trying to say to them, to all our workers, if you can put, I don't know, some cones around or some bunting around, or if you can't do that because the particular machine has to move a lot, can you get a spotter there to at least keep other people away? But that's a struggle. And of course, asbestos gets in the media and becomes a political issue, which also is something that we have to work on. So that's our high-risk construction work. And at the moment, Voss, my company, has a high-risk construction work policy. And if we see breaches, like the one I just talked about of the concreter, we actually haul him in and do a thorough investigation and talk about what his attitude was. Was it a genuine mistake? Why didn't he know? Why would you do that? And if there's a belligerent attitude, we ask him to leave the site. If there's a genuine remorse, we might have a discussion with our general manager about why he did it, and okay, it was a genuine mistake on this occasion, but if you do anything like that again, you will be off the site. So that's how we do it, and we get them to sign an agreement at induction that these are the issues that we're not prepared to budge on in relation to breaches. But by far the most injuries that we do get by number has been mentioned a number of times, and also borne out by what was talked about before with the statistics coming out of the workers' comp claims. And that is typically musculoskeletal injuries from things like people making a bad decision or twisting the wrong way. Two quick examples of that, and these have happened recently. One was we had a guy who was wheeling on a trolley dishwashers down some stairs, and we didn't have a hoist and we didn't have a lift working at the time. And he'd been doing it most of the day. And about 10 minutes before he left, he was about to leave for the day, he tripped and twisted his knee. And one of the structures in his knee went. Major surgery. So far it's 3 months off work and he's just coming back. Now, once again, I'm sure that could have been avoided had there been some better decisions making on how that particular task might have been done. The other one involves a guy who, in our workforce, got a bit of a belligerent attitude at times, but he's a particularly good worker. But he's, for years, has been putting Rio in prior to concrete being poured, and that requires a lot of bending and lifting Rio up onto chairs, these plastic chairs, so it's up off the ground. And it requires a lot of bending, and he's a guy of probably, similar to some other industries, we've got a bit of an ageing workforce, he's probably in his mid to late 50s, and he's been doing it all his life. And he was always of the view, look, I've been doing this for 30 years and nothing's happened so far. And what we've got is an injury of cumulative load, we call it. He's been doing it so many bad bends for 30 years, and finally, sometimes it happens at 30, sometimes it happens at 40, this time it's happened in his mid-50s. And he was off work with a terrible back injury, disc pathology and the like, once again for 2 months, and he's just gradually coming back to work. How do we manage some of these things? Some of the breaches with our high-risk construction work is some of the bigger players in commercial construction, Fairbrother, Voss, Hutchinson's Builds and Hanson and Young have got together to talk about our common issues in relation to some of these breaches. And we're helping some of our subcontractors with resources from our industry association, the MBA, in terms of additional training, etc. The other one is about culture, and Todd talked about it before. How do we get people to think about just before you're about to push that trolley down those stairs of what could happen? Because there's perhaps a better way. Perhaps you could have got somebody else to help you. Perhaps there's a whole range of things. And that, once again, that's about culture, of asking the question, what could hurt me? So that's sort of the issues from the construction industry. As I say, I didn't have anything particularly formal, but I hope that's given you a bit of an idea of what we're currently dealing with and what we're trying to do to make it better. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to all our speakers.